Hi, it's Steve back again. Business continuity planning, second video, and we're going to be looking at the business continuity canvas. As I said, it'll be familiar to some of you who know the business model canvas because it's basically the same elements on there. We're going to use this to help you identify for each of the 9 elements that's in the business model canvas where your risks lie, what they might be, and what the impact of them might be on you. So why do we use something like the business continuity canvas, the business model canvas? Because it's a great way of thinking about your business as a series of elements and to consider how they fit together. So rather than looking at the whole and finding it difficult to get your head around which elements might be a challenge, we're going to split it down into 9 segments, and I'm going to run through each of those. But looking at the coronavirus, what are the implications? We're going to use this as an example because you could apply this to other risks. So we're going to think about the implications on your customers, on the offer that you make them, what you sell, your product or service, your value proposition. We're going to consider your marketing and customer services. What implications does coronavirus have on that? We're then also going to consider your resources. What do you actually use to deliver the activities that deliver your value proposition? And also consider in detail the partners, the major suppliers that you use, key partners that help you deliver those activities. So we're gonna look at all of those, and we're going to consider the implication on your finances, both on generating revenues and on the costs associated with running the business. Some people, and I'm one of those, I'm a fan of thinking about the business model canvas as 3 chunks, 3 areas of activity. So we can see on the right there, that section is seen as the offer. That's the bit that's facing the customer, it's meeting their needs. And in the work that we're going to do, we need to consider whether the offer is still appropriate, whether it can be delivered, whether customers want to buy that product or service in that particular way. On the other side, the blue chunk is around infrastructure, what you have in place to deliver that offer. Often much of that is within your control, albeit that you've got relationships with partners and suppliers that you might have to consider. At the bottom there, that chunk, viability, and it's a crucial word because we want through this planning activity for you to remain viable, and that might mean changes within your offer, changes within the business infrastructure that delivers that offer. But viability is crucial. So here we are, the business continuity canvas. I'm going to walk through each of the elements, and at certain points I'm going to suggest you pause and you make notes. You jot down your ideas. Do it directly into the canvas if you have a copy of it, or write separate notes. So hopefully you've got the notes in front of you. Great thing about video is you can hit pause, take time out, capture your thinking. And that's what I'm going to invite you to do. So where are we going to start? We're going to start where I always start, with the business model canvas, which is with customer segments. So in terms of risk, you need to identify whether there are particular customer groups, customer segments that you deliver to that are more likely to be at risk in terms of not buying your product or service because of the threat of coronavirus. And a key thing here is, have you spoken to them? Do you know if they're planning? Do you know what it is that's driving their buying behavior? So in terms of customer segments, there's a couple of things that you could do here. Is one, be clear about the segments that you are delivering your product or service to. And two is being clear about what their plans are, if any, to take account of coronavirus. So, a process of identification, customer segments, and remember, a customer segment might be, if you're selling to a wholesaler, that is your customer. If you're selling to a retailer, that is your customer. If you're selling directly to the end user, they are your customer. You might do all three, and you need to identify those different customer segments, because each one of them may have a different response, a different challenge based on the threat, the coronavirus that we're talking about now. So pause here, take a few minutes, or take as much time as you like really, and jot down who are your customer segments. Also make notes about who you need to talk to find out directly from them what their thoughts and plans are about tackling the virus. Okay. So hopefully you've jotted down then your ideas about your current customer segments, and also made notes about what you need to do to follow up to find out what the threats are for them. Okay. The next element that we're going to look at is your value proposition. You probably do have a different value proposition, a different offer for each of your customer segments. So you need to consider each one of them separately. Now, those value propositions may be the delivery of a different product or a different service to each of your customer segments. So you need to tease out which is which. What we're trying to do is find out whether any of those particular value propositions, the products or services that you're offering, are at greater risk because of customers changing their buying habits. So understanding what each of those is important. As we look through the other elements, we'll also identify those where your value proposition relies more heavily on other parts of the infrastructure, not just that which is in your hands, which you control, your staff, your people, but which of those value propositions require input, activities, resources from people outside your area of control, from key suppliers, from partners. So think about your value propositions, think about the products or services that you're offering your customer segment, and identify within each of those, break them down into where you see the greater risk. And of course, that's going to then drive some questions. Do you need to talk to your key partners and suppliers to identify whether that's true or not, that's at risk? But it also feeds into the questions that you might be asking customers. Because when it comes to it, you may adjust your value proposition. You may come up with a completely different offer that meets the needs of your customer segments now. Okay, so take a few minutes and make some notes about your value propositions, the risk that you associate based on suppliers and partners, and potentially those associated with customers changing their buying behaviors. Okay, so we've done customer segments and value propositions, key offer that the business is making, and those value propositions are being delivered by the infrastructure, but they're also being promoted via your channels. So in this element, what we need to consider is the availability, the reliability, and the feasibility of using existing channels to deliver your product or service to your customers. So when we pause this time, what I'd like you to consider is, what methods are you using? How do your customers become aware of your offer, your products or services? Is that still a reliable channel? How do they evaluate prior to purchase? Is this something they see physically in a shop, or is it something they see online? And how do they purchase? These are the channels you need to consider, because what you're trying to work out is, in the current situation, in terms of business continuity, can you maintain the channels in the same way as you have before? So when we pause, that's what I'd like you to consider, is to identify the channels you use and whether you are at risk for whatever reason in that channel, in customers being able to acquire your product or service. So take a couple of minutes and have a think about that. So we've done channels. Customer relationships are often seen as similar to channels, but it plays an important part, because this is how you manage the relationship between yourself and your customers. And often this is a decision as to whether it's done, for instance, online. Amazon is done systematically online, or whether your relationships are managed through face-to-face, a one-to-one type of relationship. People like to talk on the phone or meet face-to-face in meetings. So when you consider this, what I'd like you to do is look at the way that you manage relationships with customers at the moment, and consider, can we continue to maintain that relationship? Do we need to talk to our customers to understand what would be okay for them now? This is where you might have to start being a bit more creative. What do they need to know from you? How do they want to contact you during this period that enables you to maintain that customer relationship? And remember that in terms of customer relationships, often this is the relationship where you maintain your good standing with that customer, where you retain that customer. That's where you put your effort in, but it's also where potentially you can upsell, where you're paying attention to particular customer needs. So it is part of the sales channel. So think about how you're going to fulfill that within this particular element of your business model. So when we pause, think about how you currently maintain relationships, particularly around customer service and retention. Think about whether that's still appropriate. You might even make some actions about talking to customers about how to maintain this in the future. Okay, let's pause and be back with you in a few minutes. Okay, so that offer side that we've looked at, that all generates your revenue, and this is crucial. This is the lifeblood, isn't it, of your business? This is what pays your salaries and your covers all the overheads of running the business. So we want to maintain this as much as possible. when we think about this element, you might consider, well, first of all, how do you bring revenue in at the moment? Is it by sale of a product or multiple products, perhaps to the end user or to a retailer or a wholesaler? How do you receive that cash? What terms are you on with your customers? Do you receive it immediately upon sale, or do you extend credit terms to your customers so that they pay you in arrears? In terms of bringing revenue in, you might also consider, is this the only way? If your customers are finding it difficult, for instance, and you're selling maybe high value items, paying the whole amount at this point in time, or even on 30 days credit, may not be feasible for them at the moment. Could you extend them greater credit? Could you think about offering interest-free payments over 6 months, or some form of other arrangements whereby they pay over time? So there's a number of ways that you can think about revenue streams. Of course, it's about maintaining at the same level, but sometimes it's about being creative about how your customers can pay you for the items that they're receiving, perhaps in a different way that's more suited to the current environment. So when we pause, what I want you to think about is exactly how do we currently receive our revenue? What's it made up of? Payments for products or services. Is it on retainer? Is it paid periodically? Is it subscriptions? But then also think about, how might we change that, given what we're going to be finding out about customers and their situations? How might we change that to make it possible, feasible for customers to maintain a relationship, but make it easier for them to pay perhaps over a period? So think about that just for a couple of minutes. Make some notes. Okay, we're moving from the offer side into the infrastructure. So this is what you have in place in your business model to deliver that value proposition to your customers. And the key one for you, and you think about this, is, well, what activities do we actually carry out? And the activities, if you're making things, it might be to do with production. That you're actually spending time in production. If you're into buying and selling, maybe you're about storage and distribution. If you're in tech or graphic design, you know, it's about people sitting at a keyboard doing an activity. We're coding, or we're doing graphic design, we're creating social media campaigns. So you really need to understand the key activities that are delivering the value propositions to your customer. And when you think about them, start to identify which of those are wholly within your area of control, those activities. Because some of them you might use other suppliers for, some of them you subcontract. Some of you buy in, units that you put together into a larger piece of engineered product. So think about those activities and which of those are more at risk in this current situation. And that might be to do with the fact that it's not within your control, it's outside your area of control. And that then might prompt you to note down questions that you might ask of suppliers and of partners in terms of continuity. Are you going to be able to supply or do this service, provide this activity, so that I'm able to deliver my value proposition? So in the next couple of minutes, we pause, make some notes about that, your key activities and those where you see you're at risk or greater risk because of the threat we're under. Okay guys, so we talk key activities. Now those activities are often delivered by key resources within the business, and the resources are often their people, their physical resources, they could be financial resources, they might even be intellectual property is a key resource in the business. So think about what are the key resources that you have at your disposal that deliver your value proposition. Are some more at risk than others? With coronavirus, you might say, well, people would definitely risk. The human resources that we use are definitely a risk. So we need to drill into what happens if those resources aren't available within the current business model. What might you do if for instance, some of your people did come down with coronavirus, took time off work? That has a number of implications. One of the things you might think about now is, while paying them and looking after their well-being, is can you actually find those resources from somewhere else? Could you use someone in the short term to meet customer needs? Or in fact, is it driving the question to be asked of customers, can we take a longer time to deliver? So each implication that you identify, for instance, within key resources, might lead to a number of questions that go back to the customers, that go back to key partners and suppliers. So in the next couple of minutes, identify the key resources you rely on and start to think about the risks associated with those resources being at risk, not being available, and the impact that could have, and start driving questions then is, so what could we do about that? Okay, back with us again. So from key resources, let's think about key partners. Most businesses are working with others. Many businesses now use their key partners as resources to deliver activity, and are a key and integral part of delivering the value proposition. So we need to think carefully about those partnership arrangements. Identify them first of all, but also then start to think, are some of those at greater risk of not being able to deliver either the resource or the activities that you need to meet customer needs? Who is in there that you may need to have some conversations with, that you may need to agree different arrangements with? And maybe they might be saying, we can meet your requirements, but we need more time. We can't deliver just in time. We might be able to deliver, in 2 or 3 more days. It'll be a slower delivery. So having identified your partners, identify, and often that involves talking to them, what are the things that could put at risk the current relationship and the current arrangements? Because then you can identify, well, what do we need to do about it? And you might start thinking, one of the aspects that you could do here is start to look at who else could meet this needs if a partner is completely taken out of the model because they're not able to deliver anymore. And remember, because what we're trying to protect is your business, your ability to deliver, your ability to meet customer needs, and therefore their ability to pay you for it. So there's something important to consider. So take a couple of minutes, key partners, identify potential risk and the impact and what you might do about that. Okay, back again, and here we go. So bottom left hand corner, cost structure. So in here we normally put the key costs associated with delivering the value proposition. So the key costs come out of the activities, come out of the costs of the resources, particularly if they're physical. They come out of the costs of suppliers and contractors. But they also come out, the costs come from the marketing you do, which is part of the offer side of things. The channels that you manage, the way that you manage customer relationships has an impact on the costs as well. So in here, let's think about key costs. Key costs. You know, if you were to look at them, where do they come from? Where's the majority of your cost of the business coming from? And which of those is at risk? Which of those is at risk of growing? Because yes, we can deliver the service that you want, the product that you want as part of your business offer, but it's going to cost more. So you might have to take that into account. But you also think about, are there, as you look at your costs, are there costs which are significant in terms of delivering your value proposition, but where your value proposition itself is now at risk? You need to identify those major costs that you might choose to reduce by reducing the value proposition, reducing the offer, the products or services that you offer to customers. So it's not a one-step process. It's a matter of reflection. Look at your key costs, look at the risks associated with them, then start to think about what if. Okay, take a couple of minutes and make some notes around that. Okay, so we saw this earlier, and perhaps now is a good time to think about your overall business model and the business continuity in terms of these three areas. Think about your offer. It involves talking to customers and looking at channels and finding out what are you able to maintain? What do customers want to continue to buy? It might mean that you make choices about what you do currently offer, what the value proposition is, and that has an impact then on your revenues. You might look at infrastructure on the basis of there are elements of the resources that are at risk. Our activities might be undermined by issues somewhere else in the supply chain. So you might need to make changes on that side of the business model that then also have an impact on the other side in terms of what you're offering. Both of those elements have a kick-on effect when it comes to viability, and you really need to now start to think about, with numbers, what if you make a change in who you're servicing, the products or services that you offer them, the resources that are needed to do it, and the costs associated with that. What does it do in terms of viability? And you may have to do this over 3 to 6 months, because what we're trying to do is we're looking at long-term sustainability. We want to manage the business so it doesn't get to a point of failure. And I think in that respect, it's good to do this as a stepping back from the business activity. And to think about it in terms of having to make tough choices. What would you do to sustain the business over the longer term? So we've looked at each of the 9 elements. Out of it has come a number of actions that often involve talking to people, customers, partners, contractors, to find out what their situation is, assessing the risk, and at the moment we're not doing this in a scientific way, that you have to make a judgment about where the risk lies, to adjust and make decisions about the products or services that you're going to continue to offer, the channels that you're going to use, and then the infrastructure, the activities and the resources that you use to deliver that. What we're looking for is long-term viability. What I suggest you do is, once this is in place, start those actions and then continue to review this, continue to go back to your canvas, perhaps on a weekly basis. What do we know now? What's changed? Do we have to make more choices, more decisions? So this is a management tool. I suggest you get to know it intimately, because this could help you get out of this particular threat, perhaps in a healthier state than you might be thinking now, but at least maintaining viability. One thing just to share is that the research that's been done into this stuff suggests that SMEs, and I'm a small business, micro businesses, owners tend to be generally good at taking decisions quickly in the face of challenges. So that's on the plus side for us. Why? Because we're more flexible and we respond more rapidly than larger organizations. So it allows us to deal with uncertainty even as it emerges. So using this sort of approach rather than a long-term business continuity plan means that this can be an effective approach to crisis management, which we've got to deal with. So there we go. Thanks for sticking with it. Once you've got your head around this, then I suggest you have a look at the other tool, the Business SWOT, and I'll be back to you see you again for that video in a little while. Thanks.